All right. So this is the Apache OpenWhisk community call, April 17th. We usually start by welcoming any new members. Is there anyone who would like to say hello that hasn't been on this call before?
Sure. This is Nick Hallbach, and I work with Dragos and Tyson. My first call, though I've stayed informed through them, so mostly just listening in.
All right. Welcome, Nick. All right. I don't see anyone else on, so I'll go on. So we have a new committer. Can you see my slides? I'm sharing.
Yes.
Okay. So we do have a new committer, Dominic Kim. He has been contributing to OpenWhisk since fairly early in the project when we open sourced. He has been very active, and I think he's actually done more since we've invited him to be a part of the committer and PPMC. So really excited to announce that he's he's more officially part of the community now, being able to commit pull requests and contribute to the project direction. An update on releases. The big effort that I've been doing has been to get the release out for the runtimes. Dave Grove has been doing releases for other component system, I think most recently the providers. The vote passed for the runtimes. What's included in this release are the runtimes I've listed there, so 9 in total. What's not in this release, Ballerina, and the reason for that is I'm waiting for Ballerina to hit 1.0 before we cut a release for it, and Rust. It was just too new, and I think hasn't quite hit all of the requirements for automatically publishing and getting the build artifacts built, etc. So I think once, at least for us, once that's in place, can just as easily cut a new release candidate and then do a vote, and it can be released at the same version level as the other runtimes, which are going out as version 1.13. So even though the vote has passed, I've got a little bit more work to do in terms of promoting the release candidates and publishing them to the Apache distribution site, tag the repos, etc. So I'm going to be working through that hopefully sometime either late this week or next week. Anything else on releases? Anybody else wants to comment? All right. If you haven't seen James Thomas's improvements to the web-based verification of release candidates, well worth checking out. I'd actually like to include, at least in the emails, that we can auto-generate a link to that. So another way of easing the burden of having to do a release verification. It's basically one click and does everything for you, even better than RC Verify. So I think that's something we should do. I'd like to see whether we can actually run it on an Apache hosted domain, which maybe gives us a little bit more credibility from the Apache point of view. All right, that's for future work. Looking through a lot of the PRs and activity, I know Pretty and Matt, you've been doing a lot of work on Node.js and making it Knative ready. I've listed just the main PR, which has a number of improvements to the Node.js runtime. That's pull request 119. I know there's a couple of others related to documentation. I've been trying to get Knative running locally just so I can test through this. Do you know if I can actually build and run this on IBM's Knative or on Google's Knative offering, so I can avoid the Knative mess locally?
You should be able to, but our documentation points out the specific releases that we use. We know that there were early issues with the 0.4 release, and we have a work item outstanding for Pretty Nine to upgrade to the Knative 0.5 release. So we heard it's stable. So it's an unknown.
Okay.
I hate to say it. I mean, we stuck to 3.3, and every time we switched to another platform or another implementation, we found different problems.
Right. All right. So I might, if it proves too difficult for me, and I end up spending more than half an hour trying to run it, I might just, eyeball the PR and then commit it, and then we'll fix problems as they arise. In terms of other runtimes, yeah, I think if Michele is not on, but I know he's had interest in looking at this for the action loop. And if we did that, then we would get several of the runtimes in one shot, since the action loop is part of the basis now for PHP and Swift and Go, and I think even Python. So there could be, more of our runtimes that are Knative ready. What that means in general, I still don't know, but I guess it's good to be able to run.
Yeah, that's actually welcome news. So we wanted to do the action loop runtime for the exact same reason you stated as next, but for other reasons, we decided to turn attention to Java. So I started yesterday in earnest. And I actually want to work on an OpenJ9 version of a Java runtime too with Quarkus. So that's a goal of mine, and I'm going to ask Vincent to help me with that when he gets back from vacation later this week. So I think if we have coverage on the action loop stuff, that's cool in Java. My goal is, if you look at Knative Impl, is to create a common interface, and then eventually, I know that I talked to Michelle about this before, is that the action loop could be actually used for Node in Java. So I'd love to see a lot more consolidation of the runtimes under a common action loop. And I think that'll help us going forward in terms of getting things running or working. The wiki discussions about redoing things for Kubernetes and Knative, having a more consolidation of a runtime platform. Because I think that if you look at Dragos's wiki proposal, there's something called a container proxy, and it has to do a lot more than just a simple proxy you have now. So I think we should look to see if we can do some consolidation somehow, especially with the repos and releases.
Great. Yep. So I consider this generally good. I've seen that, the other projects, OpenFaz, Alex Ellis published an article recently about running on Knative. So I think, having some sort of Knative alignment is good. I didn't want to commit Michele to doing it. I think that's up to him. I know I just had a Slack discussion with him recently about it, and he's expressed an interest in doing it. He should just comment on that when he actually does the work.
Jump on the press thing. So again, Pretty, once she gets this pull request and the other ones addresses comments and gets them merged, she wants to turn her attention to writing some blogs and getting some PR out of what we're doing, cross promotion, things like that. And we want to also start hooking up some work in Knative eventing to these runtimes as well. So look for some blog posts and some demos and things to come out of us in the next 2-3 weeks.
All right, very good. The other meaningful PR, I think, for to sort of just raise awareness of is Docker 18 upgrade. I suspect that many deployments are actually running with a more recent Docker than what we pin in the repository, which is fairly ancient at this point. I think some of the trepidation previously in upgrading was regression in performance with newer versions of Docker. Dominic has been leading this PR for 430 to upgrade to Docker 18. I think Sven from IBM expressed some issues about whether that causes downstream breakages. And I think Marcus and I chimed in on ways to mitigate that so that we're not holding up upstream changes by downstream, sort of the wrong way of doing things. So if there's any comments, that's the PR to make him on. It's like a really interesting piece of work from Chetan and at Adobe on running OpenWhisk actions using AWS Lambda. Current way that this is done, this is the PR 4412 opened as a draft, which I've looked through, is to implement a new invoker implementation. So essentially taking our OpenWhisk architecture, which has this invoker interface for managing containers, and instead of managing containers, it makes API calls to AWS to essentially ship your action code there and run it in a Lambda. I think this is pretty interesting and intriguing work. It it does. I think in the future, this raises the question of whether some of this should be pushed further upstream rather than at the invoker level, because you sort of are paying more system overhead tax than you need to.
Yeah, I mean, this actually, I'm talking about this privately, but the Knative build, we're just building a runtime, an image with different endpoints. So with the basically what we have for Knative is we have a single endpoint. We can easily the whole idea around the Knative build stuff is to build for other platforms. So pushing it upstream in our stack or up in our stack, it makes more sense to me than trying to change invokers. I'll say that.
Right. So I think this is interesting bit of work. I'm going to work. I know Chetan, I think, is away for a while on vacation, and I think when he's back, I'll work with him on getting this PR merged. If it's I think we have to take it out of draft mode, at least to be able to make it mergeable. But I think it's pretty interesting if you're interested in this general area of running across different clouds. It's a interesting bit of work, and you can imagine then sort of delegating this to other clouds in the future. There's related to this and sort of reimagining the OpenWhisk architecture for more efficiency and better control plane, data plane separation. Dominic also has a new architecture proposal. It's a revision of a previous proposal that he's talked about. He sent this to the dev list. There's been some interesting discussion about how to approach the resource allocation and bringing in some ideas from Dragos, who sort of is making the analogy to garbage collectors, and how they essentially work by allocating resources and then reclaiming garbage, which would be dead containers for us. So I expect this. I know Dominic has actually done this implementation, and they're using it in their own internal deployment of OpenWhisk with some success. So I expect this to be a longer thread of work, and it sort of suggests that maybe we should have just some sort of milestones or direction for the project that might help others coming into the project seeing where things are going. I think these are things that we can learn from other projects like Knative, where they think are more religious about sort of putting out these statements about here's what we're trying to do, and here's where it doesn't end up necessarily. It doesn't mean that that's where they end up, but eventually in the future, but at least gives them a roadmap and lets people who are just keeping an eye on the project know where things are going. We haven't quite done that from the OpenWhisk perspective, but it might be nice, especially as we get closer to graduating and then actually graduating. Some of the other projects like Kafka and Spark also do this. So I think there's some things we can improve on in general. That's really all I've prepared, I think. Yep. So if there's any comments or topics that people would like to add, free forum to do that now. Okay. Dominic has volunteered to maybe run the next one, and he can get into his proposal a little bit more, which is why I didn't want to get into it and co-opt sort of his presentation. Would be useful to actually read it if you're going to participate in the next community call, just so that you can follow it a little bit better. It's not very long, and I think it's a good way of understanding the OpenWhisk architecture if you're new to it. So since Dominic's already volunteered, then I won't solicit a volunteer for this call. Unless you're really eager, then you can sign up for a month from now. I think if there's, we should probably monitor whether there's continued interest in the community call, and if it gets harder and harder to recruit people, and it's the same people attending every call, whether we want to continue having them or not. Just an existential question for us to ponder. That's it from me. Any last comments or thoughts?
Hey, I have a 1 point that I was just thinking about today, and I was going to write to Devlist, so maybe I'll raise it here, and you can see if you have any comments. I've been working on some doc updates to the Node.js docs for OpenWhisk, because I keep answering the same questions over and over again from users, so I thought I'd just update the docs. I can save myself some work. And yeah, I was kind of updating the Node.js docs and looking at the Docker docs as well, the actions Docker, because that has not changed in a very long time and doesn't really bear a lot of relation to what people are doing on the platform today. And I'm going to take a stab at just like rewriting that as well. I'm just kind of updating it based on my experience of what users are doing and what they kind of want. And when I was reading that docs, obviously it mentions the SDK, which is still available via the CLI. So there's this like slightly odd project thing that you can install locally. I think it was supposed to essentially demo OpenWhisk Docker stuff, very early days, and the project's moved on a lot. From my understanding, like no one's ever used it. It's not particularly useful. It's just kind of an artifact of the history of the project. But yeah, I think we should essentially remove this from the CLI and get rid of it. It's kind of weird. Like the CLI downloads this external zip and unzips it, and it's just, yeah, I think no one seems to ever use it. But someone I was helping this week, again, had the thing of wanting to use Docker actions and getting sucked into this weird SDK thing and getting absolutely nowhere. So I'm going to obviously like write to the dev list and do all that kind of stuff. But I just wonder if anyone had any objections to like why we shouldn't just remove the SDK commands from the CLI. Does anyone know if people use it and find it useful?
Yeah, so you're right. This is very, very old. There's also another SDK, the mobile SDK, and I wonder if that hasn't completely rotted and we should just take both of them out while we're at it. Yeah, I think your comments are right on. The way you build a container has changed. There's now different ways of doing it. The images are all live on GitHub. You could Docker Hub, so it's much easier to just build your own Docker file. I'd be okay removing it, and I'd support removing and cleaning up our interface. Also simplifies our Nginx build and configuration too.
Cool. That's what I thought. Yeah, I think it's just an artifact of a very, of early days, especially the mobile one. I wonder if it even compiles anymore. Yes, and I think with that gone, then the docs I can update for I will update the Docker docs with the with the intention that won't be I'm not worried about having to include that slightly weird example they have about some shell script thing. This should make it, because it's something people ask about a lot. Especially internally at IBM and externally, I get questions regularly about this thing of how do I use the Docker support to add extra libraries to the thing and that kind of stuff. And yes, people get dragged into horrible rabbit holes. And I keep answering the same question about how to do it based on my blogs. So yeah, I'll send the PR for the Node stuff today. I've done how to, very explicitly how to external like NPM modules, and then with native dependencies, and then I got Webpack and Rollup and Parcel working as examples to show you how to bundle stuff. So kind of add that in there as well to kind of catch some of the common things that I get asked about a lot on the channels and things like that to improve the docs. So yeah, I'm going to keep kind of plugging away and reading docs and things like that and trying to make more improvements to that in future.
Awesome.
Well done, James. As someone who's gone down that rabbit hole before and been like, I'm confused. I'm happy to look on it.
Any continuing in the spirit of old ideas that seemed good at the time? There's this PR 4415 on the main OpenWhisk repo, which has there's this feature of Web Actions where you can provide a path at the end of the action name, and the controller projects out the value for you from the JSON result. This was done as a convenience so that you don't have to, like, if you're doing demos in the browser or you're just providing URLs to other providers and you wanted to mismatch, you had an impedance mismatch between the actions response and the provider's expectation, you can easily JQ, do the equivalent of JQ projections right in the URL. But as Web Actions have sort of evolved into really building APIs and develop more meaningful examples, that just gets in the way. So PR 4415 essentially removes that functionality. It would be a breaking change if anybody's actually using it. I found it impossible to use beyond a one-line projection. And I'll blame Carlos. He didn't stop me from doing it since he's not here.
I think, get rid. I added my comments. I always found it very confusing, and I've never seen an instance of the wild of someone ever using it. So I think we're pretty safe.
Yeah, I think the only thing about this PR is whether I should add a feature toggle to allow providers like IBM a chance to announce the breaking change and whatever the policies are, 30-day window, whatever. But I can't imagine anybody's successfully used this. It's just really hard. So the PR doesn't have a feature flag, but I'd be happy to do that. And should pass Travis later today. I just fixed a couple of tests.
Another thing, now we've on the topic of anything that comes to my mind, is the default node runtime in OpenWhisk is still node 6. And yes, have anyone any idea about upgrading that? I know, again, this is a kind of, I guess, a breaking change, but node 6 is out of LTS. And really should move to node 10, I guess. And I don't know if anyone knows any heritage of why why 6, apart from to be non-breaking, is still the default runtime, because I think it could definitely confuse. I do run into it occasionally, regularly, where if I don't specify the kind, since I write ES6 like ES7, whatever, everything super new JavaScript. If I ever forget to specify the kind, then it tries to run in the node 6 and dies. Right. So yes, it seems a security problem as well, in that it's out of LTS.
Yeah. So this wasn't so much. I did have a PR at one point that flipped the flag, and I think I made node 10 the default, since node 8 I think is going out of life 4 months sooner than expected. And that broke some of the providers. I think Kafka provider and the Cloudint or CouchDB provider. Those problems should be fixed, but that was the gating issue. I think from a provider's perspective, operator's perspective, it shouldn't be breaking change in that you control what runtimes are your default. But from a project's perspective, I think we should be able to try again. And somebody opened a PR this morning to update some of the tests, which hardcode node 6 to node 10, and I made the same comment there. That's PR 4450. So yes, we should, maybe James, if you want to send a comment to the dev list, let's bump the default runtime for node and then use that as a way of forcing function for whatever else needs to be updated.
Yes, that's a good idea. I'll send an email and then we can, I'm happy to kind of dig in to trying to, if there is still provider issues, I can dig into trying to fix them. Because yes, I think this is long overdue, as it's kind of security risk, and I certainly run into it a lot. So I can imagine lots of developers who are expecting it to default to node 10 are pretty surprised when things blow up.
Yep, fair, I agree. I think we did change Python default from 2 to 3.
Yes.
So we're current there, but we should do node as well. Thanks for bringing that up. Anything else? All right, Matt, I think you can call it a meeting.
All right, so Dom is going to be the next moderator then, you said?
Per his volunteering on the dev list, yes.
Okay, cool, thanks.
All right, thanks all for joining.
See you later, everyone.
Bye.